I know that the whole point of prize fighting is to make money for both the fighters and the promoters.
Cocaine isn't cheap.
But that doesn't mean that the business of prize fighting always leads to the best outcome for us, the fans. In fact, some literal dream fights and top-tier talent have disappeared simply because of the almighty dollar, and today we're gonna get pissed off about it because it ain't my money, so just make the damn fights. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 times the business of MMA ruined everything. Number 10, Triple C sabbatical. We're used to fighters on an emotional whim after a really tough loss saying they're going to retire. It happens pretty regularly. What happens far less often is when a double champ in their prime, who's only one of a handful to successfully defend both titles, just randomly calls it quits right there in the cage.
I want to leave on top. I just don't see myself coming back, man. I want to remain king forever.
The whole thing felt weird from the jump, and it quickly became apparent that Henry Cejudo's claimed retirement was an attempt to leverage better pay from the UFC. What's that saying? Never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel? Well, never pick a fight with the only viable fight promotion in the world when you're not even a draw. The UFC couldn't have cared any less about Triple C saying goodbye, and just 2 weeks after the bizarre announcement, his bantamweight title was vacated, and the MMA world moved on as if one of the best fighters to ever compete in these smaller weight classes hadn't just vanished from the top of the sport before our very eyes. Cejudo would sit on the shelf for a full 3 years, the literal prime of his career at the absolute peak, potentially 6 more title fights, all gone and all for nothing. Upon his return, Cejudo would get an immediate title shot, but lose a split decision to Aljamain Sterling before dropping a UD to future champ Merab. Was this a massive miscalculation on Triple C's part? This cartoon YouTuber says yes, and if this video is going to have any sort of underlying theme, it's that the house almost always wins.
Why is good help so impossible to find?
Number 9, Baby K1. You can probably contribute a lot of the UFC's playbook when it comes to dealing with fighters who have outside interests to the BJ Penn situation that arose in 2004. Penn was given leeway verbally to do other shows during his UFC tenure, and he did, like when he beat Takanori Gomi at Rumble on the Rock and earned that promotion's lightweight title. But that was before he beat Matt Hughes in a massive upset for welterweight gold on the last fight of his UFC contract. With K1 offering 5 times what Penn would make with the UFC, he signed a deal on his own. In retaliation, the UFC stripped BJ even though he was willing to fight for both promotions at the same time. Penn would sue the UFC over the stripping with an injunctive relief request to the court that the promotion cancel vacant title fight plans and lined up his next contender. The UFC claimed that their contract's championship clause would have automatically extended his time with Zuffa, making his K1 contract fucking illegal. Isn't fighting fun? Lawyers and lawsuits over stupid ass shit. This whole saga would drag on for 2 years before the parties would settle right before a trial could happen and Penn was back in the promotion. What's really dumb about this whole thing is that it sounds like BJ was willing to fight for both promotions, but the UFC were sour because he went and made a deal on his own instead of doing like Chuck Liddell did with his 2 stints in Pride FC. The UFC's burial of Penn during that period would be the go-to move in the future whenever disputes with fighters came up. Number 8, worst trade in UFC history. The only trade in UFC history, and it really wasn't a trade per se, but I guess, you know, great marketing. Look, say what you will about the entertainment value of the flyweight division and of Demetrius Johnson, but there are 2 things that you cannot deny. 1, the flyweight division in the UFC is the highest level of 125ers in the entire world. And 2, relative to his peers that are also competing in the best divisions in the entire world, Demetrius Johnson was one of the most dominant and greatest champions fighting has ever seen. These are the facts of the case, and they are undisputed regardless of how you might feel about watching DJ at 125. But greatness and business don't always line up. The UFC couldn't get fans engaged in Johnson no matter what they did, putting him on Fox cards, making that season of Tough to build up a challenger against him. The business of Mighty Mouse just was not working for either side.
He has the lowest selling pay-per-view in the history of the UFC in the modern era.
Johnson, rightly so, as one of the sport's greatest champions in the sport's premier organization, wanted to be treated as such, and the UFC wanted to extract more value from their asset. Neither side was getting what they wanted. An opportunity presented itself to DJ with his coach being such a major part of one, and with Ben Askren's renewed interest in the UFC, all resulting in one of the best fighters of all time being relegated to a smaller regional promotion right after losing his title after 11 successful defenses. fights. I know it's going to piss some of you off calling one that, and they definitely used DJ as best as would be possible, but it is just a shame the UFC didn't have Johnson until he retired. Number 7, $1 Million Gracie Challenge. The Joker in Dark Knight said,
"If you're good at something, never do it for free."
but he never specified beyond that. Like, what is a reasonable asking price for doing something that you're good at? I really wish he would have elaborated, and it might have helped out Rickson Gracie. For as legendary as Rickson is, unfortunately, starting with the first Vale Tudo Japan, we only ever really saw the man fight in what would become mixed martial arts 9 times. And 6 of those fights were over the course of 2 single-night tournaments, so that's 5 different instances of Rickson fights. And Pride 1 and 4, with all due respect, were against Nobuhiko Takada.
He's not very good.
We really didn't get much in the way of MMA from Rickson, and allegedly that was largely due to his insanely high money demands. Art Davie claimed in 2014 that Rickson asked him for $1 million to compete in the first UFC event, which in 1993 was like $7 trillion, I think. I didn't check, but I'm pretty sure.
And I said, nobody's getting $1 million. Hey, so you and Orion are getting rich. He said, I don't think that. He said, I want some of that action. So we were never able to get him in. He went over to Japan, and you know the rest of that story.
Here's Art talking about trying to get Rickson for UFC 6. See if you notice a pattern emerging.
And Rickson asked for $1 million. He's getting $1 million, Rickson.
Yeah, this dude's not doing shit unless he sees at least 6 zeros. Rickson allegedly turned down the first ever ADCC after a $1 million price tag was not met. I even found an article of possibly questionable origin given the language barrier that Inoki offered Rickson $5 million to headline his 2012 New Year's Eve show against Kaz Fujita. But at least at that point, he was 52 years old, so maybe getting in the ring to fight people, not a great idea. Maybe that one wasn't about the money. Overall point though, we probably didn't see a ton of Rickson Gracie because he wanted way too much money. Number 6, GSP's second return. As much as I hate how much the business of MMA gets in the way, sometimes you gotta protect your interests in the longer term, and while it does suck for us, the fans, I do understand this one. GSP's initial return to MMA after his semi-retirement following the Johnny Hendricks bout was a magical moment, no doubt.
I'm back.
But it left the UFC in a tough spot since St. Pierre almost immediately vacated the middleweight title, something he said he would not do, but believed he had no choice due to a colitis diagnosis. However, by late 2018, GSP had recovered, or was better managing his ailment, and tried to make for a big ol' super fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov. The UFC was having none of it though because they didn't want St. Pierre to again take a title and then immediately leave the division. Once formal talks fell apart, GSP retired, but the bout lingered all the way up to Khabib's retirement, with St. Pierre claiming he heard from the Eagles team that the plan was to call him out after the Gaethje fight to be the capstone of Khabib's career, his 30th win before retiring. But of course, unfortunately, with the tragic death of his father, Nurmagomedov would retire immediately after the bout. That said, I still don't think the UFC would have gone for it. Number 5, Fumbling Cro Cop. Oh yeah, you guys know how I feel about this one, and this is the example of business getting in the way of fighting that pisses me off the most. In the mid-2000s, I would likely say that more UFC fans than not were largely unaware of what was happening in the sport in Japan, which sounds crazy given how massive Pride FC was, but it wasn't easily accessed here in the United States during that time period, and the vast majority of fans were new. They came from the tough boom, their sense of the sport's history or that there were other things out there that weren't the UFC were pretty minimal, and you can see it in the marketing the promotion did for fighters coming into the promotion from Pride, like Rampage Jackson, who a lot of new fans were shocked to find out had beaten Chuck Liddell. It was in this environment that the UFC decided after signing Mirko Cro Cop, who had just won the 2006 Openweight GP and was easily one of the top 3 heavyweights on the planet, that he needed to be established with US audiences instead of immediately giving him the winner of Randy Couture and Tim Sylvia. Even after his big debut where he KO'd Eddie Sanchez, the UFC, instead of making an all-time heavyweight dream fight between Cro Cop and now champion Couture, put him in a title eliminator with Gabriel Gonzaga. That would only establish that the UFC just lost a whole bunch of money trying to make a whole bunch of money. The establishing with US audiences would backfire in the most spectacular way possible, and Cro Cop would never even see a title fight. Stupid, 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 stupid.
Stupid, 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 stupid.
Number 4, Maymac ended combat sports. Okay, obviously I'm being hyperbolic, but seriously, Maymac definitely had unforeseen and far-reaching consequences, not to mention some foreseen ones. For starters, us thus never getting to see Conor McGregor versus Tony Ferguson, which really does suck considering we never got Tony versus Habib either. El Kukui deserved way more. In Conor's long absence as a result of his boxing ambitions, and with Habib struggling to be healthy long enough to fight regularly, Ferguson became the division's uncrowned king, earning interim lightweight gold after Maymack, but ultimately never getting a chance to do that unification bout with McGregor, who wouldn't see the cage again until a whole year after Ferguson won the interim title. Now, all that said, do not get me wrong, Conor fighting Floyd Mayweather was really fucking cool, like one of the cooler things that's ever happened in combat sports. So on the one hand, I'm glad it happened, but on the other, the current landscape of combat sports is almost entirely Maymack's fault. It was the blueprint for every single MMA fighter. I'm gonna win a belt, and then immediately I'm gonna beat the best boxer in the world, and the UFC is totally gonna let me because I'm a huge draw, like the biggest draw the sport's ever seen.
Hey, listen, Kamaru's my brother, but the reality is this: you cannot fight Canelo Alvarez.
And while I cannot fault fighters for their ambitions, it has led to quite a few of them now getting beat up by fucking Jake Paul, which is without question the worst consequence of Maymack. These stupid-ass freak show tentpole events that, like the sequels to Jaws, just never really fully captured why Maymack actually worked. Without McGregor versus Mayweather, there is no Paul versus Tyson, and for the sin of that event's very existence, we should all be cast into the fires of Mount Doom. Number 3, Saku-Shamrock. It was the biggest fight of the early 2000s that just never came to be, and once again, the business of the sport got in the way. After retiring, quote-unquote, from the UFC, the 26-year-old Frank Shamrock was largely considered to be the best under 200-pound fighter in the world. During that same time period, Kazushi Sakuraba would rise to arguably take that spot from Shamrock. Everybody wanted the fight, including Shamrock and Saku, who both at different Pride events called each other out. As Shamrock tells it, at one point they were very close, but over a 6-month period, negotiations fell through, with Frank claiming the Pride contract did not work for him and did not even specify that he would be fighting Sakuraba specifically. Concerned about getting locked into something else when all he wanted was the Saku bout, Frank walked. While that was the closest things got, besides offering him to be the last second replacement for Rickson Gracie, there were like 4 other serious attempts to make this fight in the early 2000s, including efforts from Scott Coker, who wanted the bout for his first ever Strikeforce show, but regulations would get in the way there, and it just never came to be after that. But had Pride worked with Frank a bit more on that contract, we might have gotten one of the biggest fights ever. Thanks a lot, Yakuza. Number 2, they ruined heavyweight. Yep, no, I'm not gonna stop beating this drum. I know everybody is tired of the whole Aspinall-Jones thing, and rightly so. When something is a discussion for 460 plus days, it gets tiring. But honestly, that's probably the smallest part of the business of the UFC wrecking the heavyweight division. Let's not forget that first, we were denied Jones versus Ngannou, which I would still want to see right now before the Aspinall fight, all things considered. John was ready to move up, ready to fight Francis, but he and the UFC could not come to terms, with Dana claiming his demands for the fight were outrageous.
Told my lawyer he wants what Deontay Wilder was paid. I think it was $30 million.
So the result of that negotiation breaking down was that the greatest fighter ever was just sitting on the shelf for 3 whole years. I think we're just so used to the business of MMA ruining everything, we don't even realize the stuff we lose. In what world does that not suck to you? Imagine prime Tom Brady sitting for 3 seasons over a contract dispute. There would have been riots in Boston. But the bigger issue that would emerge from all of that was losing Francis Ngannou altogether. The heavyweight champion of the world, the current lineal champion going all the way back to Rickson Gracie, is now fighting in the PFL. Ngannou wanted a less restrictive contract, wanted to be able to box, but they could not come to terms, and by terms I mean the UFC doesn't do shit like that for anybody, unless you're Conor. The promotion and Ngannou had issues from before he even became champion, but all of it was related to the business of fighting. So we lost the heavyweight champion, we lost a super fight, John Jones sat for 3 years, and now we're in a situation where Jones would fight Aspinall as everyone wants, but he wants to be compensated for it, and will the UFC do so? History says that's a big ol' fat nope. Number 1, Fedor.
He has become my obsession. I want it worse than the fans want it now, believe me.
We all know Dana White, and for him to say that publicly, you know that he absolutely believed that he was getting a deal done with Fedor. That interview was from 2010, about 9 months after the now infamous island meeting where Dana and Lorenzo flew to some remote spot that Fedor was vacationing to hash out a deal to fight Brock Lesnar. Negotiations that would ultimately fail, but according to most sources, was the closest the UFC ever got to signing Emelianenko. But that wasn't the first time the UFC had tried to get the last emperor into the promotion. promotion. After the fall of Pride FC, everyone, including White, fully expected Fedor to sign with the UFC, but instead he partnered with M1 Global, a promotion very much open to co-promoting, but very much not open to allowing Fedor to compete without their involvement. This would end up being the main point of contention at pretty much every junction. First, with the Couture bout, one of the catalysts, in fact, for Randy temporarily leaving the promotion, and then after the fall of Affliction, when the bout with Lesnar was in play, and then prior to Fedor signing with Strikeforce, and Bellator even. There's a whole bunch of he said, she said from both sides that we don't have anywhere near the time to get into here. But even without the details, it's abundantly clear that it was the business of fighting that prevented us from seeing the greatest heavyweight of all time finally competing in the UFC in massive fights. There's only one man that could have gotten the Fedor deal done, and that's the editor of this video, Max Randall. Please follow him on all his socials and go check out his kick-ass YouTube channel. A massive thanks to our channel members. You guys are seriously the best. Fight fans, we've simplified things. There's just one tier now. Join up and get exclusive content. Like and subscribe so the business of YouTube doesn't take away something else we love. Leave a comment about times money in the sport pissed you off the most. And thank you so much for watching, guys. Always appreciate it. I'll see you later.